Welcome, Jennifer. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
I've been looking forward to our conversation because the topic itself intrigued me, wardrobes and writing. So, we are going to come to wardrobes and writing in a minute, but why don't we start with who Jennifer is? What is your story?
Well, I am a writing coach now. That wasn't plan A. I'm I am coming to you from Cornwall. As you can hear, I did not grow up in the UK. I grew up in Oklahoma. Um, my parents and sister are still there, and I decided after I finished my undergraduate that I wanted to get a PhD, so I moved off to California to do that. And while I was in California, I met my husband, who is English. We met at the Dickens Universe Conference, which is basically a summer camp for people who like reading Dickens novels. It's a week-long thing. I don't recommend starting a romantic relationship surrounded by people who read 19th century novels. All of the novels end in marriage. They wanted the conference to end in marriage. It did 2 years later. Um, but so that's what brought me to the UK. I did finish the PhD and I did teach in higher education for a while, but I didn't move all this way to live with my husband or live in the same country to still not live with him. So after he got a permanent post, then I started thinking, what else can I do with my education that doesn't have me traveling from one end of the country to the other trying to get teaching? So I started my own business. To begin with, I was an editor, but I really missed teaching. So I started coaching people on writing books. And I now mostly work with coaches and healers who want to write their credibility building books. And I realized that coaching gives me all of the things I loved about working in universities without any of the things I hated, like faculty meetings.
Yeah.
The lovely thing about being a solopreneur is that if you need to have a team meeting, you take a walk and have one right there in your head. And I've also realized in the last probably 10 years or so, because I have been teaching writing since 2001. And when I was a PhD student, they actually trained us in how to teach it. That if I had taken my own advice starting in 2001, I could have cut 2 or 3 years off the PhD process. So now I take my own advice and teach other people how to write quickly and without, making yourself crazy.
Wow, what a story. What a story. The equivalent of faculty meetings would be Excel sheets for me. I mean, I was okay with them. It's not that I struggled with them or anything, but I just found them soul crunching. Not my thing. I don't have to do them anymore, and I'm pretty happy about it. So yes, I completely hear you when you say coaching gives you all the good bits, and you don't need to do all the bad bits.
Yeah.
I feel the same. What an interesting story. And I think our audience should definitely listen to that advice on not starting a romantic relationship with da 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 da. Thank you for sharing your story. So let's talk a little bit about wardrobes and writing. What is this whole deal about wardrobes and writing?
If you read books on writing, you will inevitably come across advice that your first draft should either be you vomiting on the keyboard or defecating on the keyboard. It's not the word they use, but there might be children in the room. And that's how you should approach your first draft, because the only good first draft is a finished one. I agree with the ideas behind that you do need to get your first draft out of your head and onto the page as quickly as possible. But I was never happy with the analogy of making that kind of mess. Because if I did either of those things to my keyboard, I would hope my husband would take me away to get the help I needed and a new keyboard. You're not going to go back and make it pretty.
No.
So I was thinking about, most of the clients I work with are women. I was thinking, what do women do that is similar in the process and the steps that you go through that doesn't stress them out to find a new way to think about writing? And then I cleared out my wardrobe and I was like, this is it. because step one is to chuck all of your clothes on the bed. And we don't get stressed over that. We just do it. And that's what your step one of writing, blog post, book, whatever, you're just chucking your words on the page. Step two is to sort your clothes into what you want to keep, what you want to need to fix, and what you want to get rid of. You do the same thing with your words. And then you fix what needs to be fixed and put it all together so that it looks pretty. Or in the wardrobe's case, so that it's functional and usable. And whenever clients start saying, well, I tried to write yesterday, but I couldn't think of the right word to start the sentence, so I didn't write anything. That's when, if you go back to the wardrobe analogy, that would be like taking out a shirt, realizing it needs a button, and sewing the button on before it could go on the bed to be sorted. You don't do that. So the wardrobes and writing analogy really frees my clients up to be able to write, because they realize there's no danger in just putting words on the page and not worrying about a mess.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I've never viewed writing in context of decluttering and organizing our wardrobes. This is so powerful. This is so powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
It also reminds us to just do one thing at a time. Generating ideas isn't in itself hard. Editing text isn't in itself hard. If you try to do them at the same time, that's a recipe for weeks of writer's block.
I hear you. One thing at a time. Yeah, that's a simple tip that we can implement so easily. No rocket science there. One thing at a time. So we either focus on writing, or we focus on proofreading, or we focus on editing. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
And
but would you say a lot of people don't do that?
they don't, because they don't want to go through the stages, and they want the perfect draft so that the first draft is the final draft. Or that's what most of us did at school when we were writing our term papers the night before they were due. And that's also what people are doing whenever they tell themselves, I can't write if I'm not under pressure. No, you can, you just don't write if you're not under pressure. Mm-hmm. And it's because whenever you're finally under pressure and the thing is due tomorrow, so you finally sit down and write it today, you're able to get your internal editor just to let you get it done, because the risk of not doing it is greater than the risk of you doing it wrong. Mm-hmm. Because when we get stuck in our writing and we're trying to edit as we write, it's our internal editor getting in the way. And she has a place. She needs to come in when you're editing, but she doesn't need to come in for the idea generation part. Yep. And she's like that voice that she's just trying to protect you. And she remembers all the times at school, probably, that you wrote something and it was wrong and it got a low mark from the teacher. And she's trying to protect you from that. We're business owners. We don't have teachers standing over our shoulders anymore. But you still have that voice in your head trying to protect you. So whenever my clients, they try applying the wardrobe metaphor, and if that really isn't working, then we get out brightly colored, unlined paper and crayons, because then your internal editor sees what you're doing is play and she doesn't get involved. So then you can get the ideas to come.
Right. So our internal editor is similar to our inner critic. Would you say that?
Yes. They're the same thing. I think probably every coaching format has its own word for it. I use editor because that's what she's trying to do to what you're writing. But it's your...
So what else does this internal editor say typically, apart from getting us into that editing mode? What are some of the common things people hear her say?
She'll, especially around book writing, I haven't come across people who worry about whether they have the authority or the expertise to write a blog. But on book writing, well, I can't write a book. I'm not the expert. It's like, well, but you have a business and people pay you to do this thing. So you are an expert. Nobody is the expert. But their internal editor has been telling them that until you are the best in the world, which is never going to happen, because there is no one best in the world, that you don't deserve to write, or that your book has to be the final word on whatever your topic is. That's not a useful way to think about your book. Your book is entering the larger conversation, and your internal editor is seeing it as the book stamps your authority on it. It does, but it's not announcing you as the only person who knows anything. It's announcing you as somebody who is joining the other group of people who know a lot of things about your topic.
Mm. Yeah, I really like how you have put it, because there are so many people who would stop themselves. And it's not just in the book writing field that we would see this whole thing about, unless I've made it to a certain level, and that could be revenue for somebody, it could be social media presence for someone else, or a certain number of clients, we would have our own matrix to
Mm-hmm.
evaluate or judge us. I wouldn't do so and so. And that gets in the way of so many people. I help people with their stories and speaking, and people have exactly similar stories going on in
Yeah.
their head, because unless and until I get to a certain level, when somebody works with me to set up a business, for example, through one-on-one coaching, they would say, oh, but unless and until I've got to a certain revenue, I cannot even call myself a proper business owner. But that's just not true.
Yeah. I go through that with, I'm not an author. I can't tell people I'm writing a book. It's like, as soon as you put words down that are meant to be read by somebody else, you are
Yeah,
an author.
yeah,
And because I get a lot of resistance from writers, because part of the marketing of your book is you have to start telling people about it from day one. And they said, well, that means I have to write it. Is that not why you're paying me to help you write? Of course, it means you have to write it, but it also means that you're going to have people waiting for it. So you're going to have readers when you finish, which is the purpose of the whole exercise.
yes. So talk to us a little bit more about telling people about your writing or the product that you're working on and birthing and are going to bring out in the world.
It can be as simple as whenever you're introducing yourself in a networking meeting and you've got your 30 seconds, work in that, and I have a book coming out next year called, and then your title. Because
Hmm.
I think I'd come up with the first half of my title. There's a book in every expert, that's you, fairly early on. So you start working that into your elevator pitch so that people can start, oh, she's writing a book. And once they hear she's writing a book, well, then she knows what she's talking about. And then you get all people take you more seriously because you're an author.
Yeah.
You can also, depending on your field, in blog posts and social media posts, talk about the writing process. In the process of writing a book, you learn a lot about yourself and how you work. I had been teaching writing for 18 years whenever I started writing my book. Still, when I finished the first draft and I was holding all of those pages, I know a lot about writing. Of course I do. I haven't just been standing up spouting off nonsense for 18 years. But there is, you take yourself more seriously. You see more clearly what your process is. And just doing those things and talking about that self-discovery. Because if you're working with, as a mindset coach, talking about your mindset shifts as you are writing out your process can be really powerful, so that then your clients can see, okay, she doesn't have this 100% figured out, but she has it figured out enough to start helping people, because nobody has it 100% figured out, kinds of things.
Yeah. 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 It is so important to start talking about our work. I really love the suggestion that you have made, that we can weave it into our 30 seconds elevator pitch. Because if somebody were to say, hey, I have a book coming up, it is going to open up a conversation for sure. There's no way that a conversation wouldn't start after that.
Yeah, and it does give people an easy question to ask you.
Hmm.
And it's a question you're going to have an answer for because you've been spending a lot of time writing this book.
Yes.
So then you get into a meaningful conversation about what you do without it being about sales or anything that might make either side of the conversation or party in the conversation uncomfortable.
Yeah. And like you said, it's a response they would have already prepared. So it's like
Mhm.
leading a conversation, and you are getting them to ask you about something that you already know about or are an authority on. You are an authority on what you're writing.
Yeah,
And so that asserts your positioning as an expert even more. So I think
yeah,
it's a very clever way to do it. And it's a very simple way to do it.
yeah. And then that lets you elaborate on it without feeling like you're just sort of holding forth and taking over the conversation because you have people asking you,
Yeah.
then you're just answering them.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. You're getting them to ask you what you want them to ask you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very clever. Very clever. And so simple to implement.
Yeah.
So simple to implement. You talked about a very important point, Jennifer, which is about discovering more about ourselves when we do
Mhm.
the writing process. So talk to us a little bit more about that.
Well, as you know, using most of my clients are coaches. For a coach to actually have to put into words the whole process that they take their clients through, you're going to learn a lot about that process, but also through the discipline that it takes to write most days, you're going to learn a lot about yourself and how you work, what kinds of things are going to set off your internal editor and make you not work. And you learn more ways of managing that critical voice so that you can do the thing that needs to be done. One of the things I recommend to all of my writers, no matter what they're writing, is commit to just 10 minutes a day. And if you sit down for your 10 minutes of writing and you really can't write, then open a ventilation file and write about why you can't write. And then at the end of 10 minutes, if you still can't write, you kept your promise to yourself and you can move on. And so by building these kinds of habits through the writing process, you learn to trust yourself more. And clients will, your 10 minutes a day thing made sense. So I applied that to, I really need to organize my house. So I applied that to just spend 10 minutes tidying. And that falls into place. 10 minutes exercising. There are all sorts of habits that once you build it in one place, then you see it everywhere, that suddenly you can do these things you've been avoiding. And writing is, I mean, it's the classic one. Writers always talk about writer's block because we all get it. And learning
Mm.
how you're going to manage that, because it will come, um, teaches you how you work, what motivates you. I also recommend that my writers um, set tiny and big rewards for the various goals. So if your goal is to write 1,000 words, um, one of them, she loves jelly babies. I can't stand the texture. I think I was too old the first time I had a jelly baby. But she'll line up 10 jelly babies, and every 100 words she gets one. And that will keep her writing until she gets her 10th one. Others will say, if I keep my 10 minutes every day for a week, then, this is pre-COVID, I'm going to walk to the chocolatiers in town and buy a truffle and then go sit in the park and eat it. So you come up with little things that will keep you motivated. And that's another, and you're probably motivating yourself in ways that you haven't with other processes. And then you attach that to your writing, and then you see that you can attach it to other things. I do encourage them to come up with at least a few rewards that aren't chocolate or sugar based, because we do like our teeth. And
Fair enough.
yeah.
Yeah. Love the idea of rewards and recognition. In my previous life, my previous life is before I got into coaching full time. I used to work in the corporate world, and specialized in something called as talent management, which is all about growing and retaining talent in global corporate organizations. And one of the ways in which we used to grow talent in the organization and retain them was reward and recognition. So
Mhm.
identify behaviors that the organization rewards and then go ahead and reward people. And no matter how little the reward was or how big the reward was in terms of the monetary value or in terms of the status, it always worked. I think it fulfills a very core human need to
Yeah.
be acknowledged and validated.
And we don't often get that if we work for ourselves because there isn't anybody there. So, yeah, it is important that we take the time to recognize what we've done and that it is significant and that it deserves a reward.
Yeah, yeah. I love
Um,
I love what you just said. I love what you just said, that we've got to reward ourselves and we've got to acknowledge the good things that we have done, because we don't have bosses, which is a good thing.
yes.
but but there's no one else to do it for us. This reminds me of a dinner time conversation we had at home a few weeks ago, wherein a client sent me a very nice testimonial, and I happened to check it on my phone, and I showed it to my husband and I said, well, I don't have a boss. So I'm just going to show it to you myself. And there's no one else who can say nice things for me in terms of management.
Mhm.
I'm just going to do it for myself. And this is a testimonial I've received, and you can go on and appreciate me. We had a bit of fun around testimonials. Yeah, because we have got to appreciate the work that we are doing and the journey we
Mhm.
we have been on and all our achievements.
Yeah. And the I think the trap too many business owners fall into is the never ending to-do list.
Yeah,
Well, I can't recognize that this thing that I finished, and you should recognize and at least the recognition, if not a reward, because I've got all this other stuff to do.
yeah,
Um, I got sick of that. I keep, the deadlines and things that need to get done, I have plotted out on a calendar, but I don't keep that long to-do list. And instead I keep a things I've done list
yeah,
so that at the end of the day, I can't tell myself I haven't done anything because I didn't finish the big thing. And this really started. If you're writing something big like a book, you don't get to tell yourself that you haven't done anything because you didn't write a book today. Nobody writes a book in a day. Um, so having to write down at the end of the day that I wrote 500 words, that is, I've done it. And yeah, it does help that horrible negative self-talk that
yeah,
you didn't finish the big thing, so none of it mattered.
yeah. And it allows us to be kind to ourselves, really.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um, yeah, in my coaching, I'm consciously trying to get rid of all of the punitive and sometimes violent talk that we use with ourselves about writing.
Yeah.
Because you'll hear writers, well, I'm just going to chain myself figuratively to my desk until it's done. That's no way to do it. I
Mm.
tried that.
Hasn't
when I was
worked.
a no, when I was a PhD student, I'm serious academic now. I'm going to sit down and write for 6 to 8 hours a day because that's what academics do. So I thought, and I could make myself sit there. Still only going to write about 2 hours a day. Because whenever you would sit down and tell your brain that all we're going to do now is write, your brain turns into a toddler at nap time. My brain would do anything else, but it wasn't going to write. So yeah, I and all of the advice, I'm getting rid of all of that. Chain yourself to the desk. It is a discipline, and you do have to be disciplined to come back for your 10 minutes every day. But
Mhm.
I don't put it in terms of something bad's going to happen if you don't.
Yeah. I remember I had put up a post a few months ago. Mm, I must have put it up on LinkedIn as well as Facebook. And the language that I used was, It was about something affirming, a
Mhm.
positive message. But somewhere I said, and I look at it with, I, I assessed myself with brutal honesty and then went on to say whatever I wanted to say. And a fellow coach, who is also a dear friend, she said, why brutal? Why do you have to be brutal with yourself? And that really brought my attention to the words that
Mhm.
I was using for myself. I wouldn't want anyone else to be brutal to what they were
Yeah.
doing or brutal with themselves or to themselves. So it was really interesting. That reminds me of the punitive thing that you are talking about. We've got to take the punishment out of the equation.
Yeah. But also whenever things go wrong, like if you look at how people write about writer's block, they're going to bust through the writer's block, break through. It's always a violent that you're doing something to the writer's block. I would much rather you ask questions of the block. Why is the block there? What is it trying to tell you? Because sometimes you get blocked because you're not writing the thing that needs to be written. And your brain just says, nope, this isn't what you need to be doing. So we're just not going to write anything.
Yeah.
And, busting through that isn't going to get you to being able to write the thing that needs to be written. Last October, I think, I interviewed 12 authors. Um, all of them were coaches of one variety or another, but they were from all over the place. Most of them I didn't know very well. One of them I got, and this is the one I'm going to be talking about, got back in touch with after years. We'd been on the same soccer team as teenagers. And we got back in touch on Facebook, and she writes now. And she was talking about one of her experiences of writer's block, that she wanted to write the piece that was safe, not the piece that was going to make her vulnerable. And her brain just wouldn't let her write the safe one because that wasn't what needed to be in that book.
Mm.
And I think had she, and it's just not her personality, but had she taken the route of she's just going to bust through the block, she never would have gotten there. But that book is the one that has really built her practice, because it taught her more about, because she's an emotional strength coach, taught her more about how she works, both personally and with her clients. And then, it was able to communicate better with her clients than the safe one would have.
Yes, yes. Because probably she couldn't let vulnerability slip,
Yeah.
because the value was coming from there and not by staying safe and small.
Yeah.
Mm.
And once it was all out, none of the horrible things she thought was going to happen happened, and quite the opposite. But yeah, it's writing, even, I mean, my book is about how to write a book about your business. There's
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of personal stuff in there, but it still is a bit vulnerable because it's still kind of you on the page. And if you're going to write a book about, dealing with divorce, drawing on your own divorce or illness or miscarriage or whatever,
Yeah.
that vulnerability is going to come up.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just need a way to work through that instead of hammering away at the writer's block whenever it comes up.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So what we are talking about is we are trying to cut ourselves some slack, be kind and compassionate, and really befriend our writer's block instead of busting through it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it does take some time to recognize the difference between, I'm not writing because I'd really rather be on the sofa binge watching Netflix, and I'm not writing because there's some emotional stuff I need to work through. And you do have to be very self-aware and not let it turn into weeks binge watching Netflix, because that's not going to move anything forward,
No.
except I guess your knowledge of Netflix. But
Well, watching Netflix has its place, but it may
it
not
does.
really help you with your book writing, that's for sure. Yes, you are so correct about working on ourselves, because this is such a massive journey, writing a book or getting a message out, if we just
Mhm.
want to simplify it. And before we can do that, we've got to always go within and work on ourselves.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think it's easier for people to see writing a book as a massive journey because that feels like a big thing to do. I'm really working on getting my blogging clients to see that they aren't just writing a blog. Each blog post is a fairly short piece in and of itself. But if you are generating enough content to post every month or fortnight or even week, I'm really glad the days of daily blogging have long passed us by. How did people do that? But that you need to see that as significant and not dismiss it because it's not a book. Because the blog, absolutely, I mean, that's probably going to be the first point of contact for most of your clients, not the book and not your coaching programs.
Yep.
So that yeah, I'm trying to get them to look at it as a whole instead of, well, I just have to make myself do that in an hour on a Wednesday afternoon and get it out.
Yep.
Because that's not going to do much for them or their readers.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. That is true. I want to talk to you about something really important, something that I see as very important whenever we share our message with other people, whether it is through writing or through speaking, storytelling in whatever form. And that is feeling the responsibility that comes onto us, authors, writers, speakers, when we share our message. So, talk to us a little bit about that. What does that responsibility sound and look like?
You are responsible to yourself to do the story justice. So, like my friend who wasn't wanting to tell the story that made her vulnerable. That doesn't mean you have to share every sort of detail about every bad thing that's ever happened to you, but you are responsible to yourself to share what needs to be shared, but also to be aware of its impact on others. So, if you are an abuse survivor going into a women's shelter and talking about the abuse itself rather than the survival part isn't going to be helpful for them. So you need to think about your audience. And one that comes up a lot in my work is you have to meet your reader where she is now. A call that I had yesterday, the client was saying, but that's not the book I want to write. That's not who I am now. That's what I would have wanted to read 10 years ago. I was like, okay. And your ideal clients, are they you now or are they you 10 years ago?
Mhm.
And so you do have a responsibility to present the material in a way that's going to meet the audience where they are. You can't expect them to fast forward to what you want to be doing now. You have to take them on that journey so they can get there.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, that's a very important point that we all must remember. And it's not just in the context of writing, really. It can be your coaching, it can be speaking, any offer, really. We have got to meet our audience where they are and not
Mm-hmm.
where we are.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, sorry. Completely lost it. It'll come back.
What about the responsibility that we owe to the people and the world around us, from the point of view of, are we building people up or are we tearing them down, or are we bringing people together or are we dividing them? Those kinds of considerations. Talk to us a little about those.
Um, yeah, I think we do have a responsibility to use our stories, however we get them out, to improve the world we live in. I realized, I think about 6 months ago, though it may have been 8 or 9 months, this year has all kind of blurred into one. um, I realized the connection between my PhD thesis and what I do now. Um, I won't go into detail about the PhD thesis, but it was on how George Eliot used music to represent emotion in her novels. George Eliot is the pen name for Marian Evans. And in that, I was looking at what she said she wanted to accomplish as a novelist, and that she wanted to change people's hearts and improve the world one heart at a time. By the end of her career, she kind of gave up on that because she just didn't think people could be changed. I'm not that cynical. I'm also not 80 years old and living with all of her conditions. So I think that we can change the world through our stories, and we need to help people see the world from a perspective other than their own. There's a lot of what Eliot does in her early and, well, actually until her last novel, in her work, is that she wants the readers to feel what we would now call empathy. It wasn't a word yet in English, where you feel the same thing as somebody else. So it's not that you feel sorry for them, it's that you understand how they're actually feeling. And I think that our stories can help people understand how we feel. They can see similarities to their situation, but they can actually experience things through our stories without having gone through it themselves. And I
Yeah.
think if we could just all understand each other a bit better, surely we would have to be nicer to each other.
Yes. Yes. So how do we get those boundaries right? Because when we talk about our stories, then obviously we don't live all by ourselves in this world. There are other people involved, and we interact with other people, and other people would have played a role a lot of times as supporters, as our cheerleaders, and other times as the abusers or
Mhm.
people or the perpetrators. So how do we get that balance right, that we are able to share our story and not really violate any boundaries that we should? First of all, tell us, where does that boundary lie, and then how do we respect that boundary? So there are two questions for you here.
I think there are actually two boundaries on for where it lies, because you have the legal boundary of if one of the women I interviewed for the thing last October has recently published a book about her surviving an abusive relationship, and she took legal advice, and her abuser isn't identifiable because she I haven't read the book, so I don't fully understand why, but he was never convicted. She moved from one country to another one to get away from it. Um, so legally, had she named him because he was never convicted, she could have been sued. So there is the legal boundary, and for that, you need to talk to a lawyer about where it is. But there's also the personal boundary. So if you're writing about, say, mother-child relationships and your mother's still living and you want to write about problems that you had in your relationship with her, you're either going to have a conversation with her about, I'm writing this book. How do you feel about that? Or you need to decide that you're going to write the book and let her have her opinions. And that, I do know writers who have done that. I personally wouldn't be able to do that. I would have to talk to her about it or just wait and
Yeah.
publish it whenever she's passed. But um, I think every boundary is going to, it takes negotiation and conversation, because you need to think about the full impact. If you, and even if it's not something like a difficult relationship with your mother, if you're writing about a hard time you went through in your life, and say you had young children at the time and they enter into the story, they weren't causing the problem, but they're in the story. Before you publish that, you've got to ask them, how do you feel about me publishing this if you're going to be named in the book, because they have a right to decide that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. As a story coach, I do not suggest that people write other people's stories, share other people's stories, because they are not their own stories to share.
Mhm.
And it is very easy to get those boundaries wrong. And when we flout those boundaries, it usually gets very messy because
Yeah.
others didn't ask for it. They didn't want to be featured in our story. So that's something really important to be careful of.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the mother-daughter relationship example, in presenting your side of your understanding of your relationship with your mother, you're going to be mentioning your mother, but you're focusing on your experience of it. And that does get messy, and you've got to decide what you can do with that. I do, though, tell my writers, for the first draft, you don't worry about any boundaries. The first draft, you're the only one who's going to read it. You just put everything on the page that needs to be there. In the editing, you decide, does this really need to be here? Or was I just venting or processing or
Yep.
whatever?
Yeah. I think it is also helpful to think what the reader is going to get out of it. I remember that when I wrote and published my first book, which was my cancer memoir, when I did the first draft, there was, I would say, a fair amount of anger because my life was, it had turned upside down, and not
Yeah.
every, well, there were very few things that were pleasant that were going on. Yes, I did manage to find the positivity in cancer, but life was pretty screwed up, let's put it that way.
Mhm.
And so the first draft had anger, and you could read it, and you could feel it, and it stayed there for the next few drafts, because a book would typically take a lot of drafts. But
Mhm.
then I did, by working through, by venting out, and by going through my content again and again, I did get to a point wherein I was able to ask myself, why am I writing this book? Am I writing this book to vent out my anger? No, that's not what my objective is. I want to raise awareness about cancer and what it is like to go through cancer, and how somebody can find positivity. And so
Yeah.
with that big purpose in mind, I was able to really turn it around. And it was such a great opportunity for me to work on myself, because then I was able to work with a coach, and I dealt with that anger. And that is why it is not there in the book anymore,
Yeah.
because I did something about it.
Mhm.
So I think it's, yeah. So it kind of ties into what you said right in the beginning, that it's a great opportunity for us to learn so much about ourselves. And it always helps to keep your audience in your mind.
It helps to keep your audience in mind for second and subsequent drafts. The first draft is for the writer.
Yes, yes.
Um, but yeah, absolutely. And that is when you start, in your case, getting the anger out of the book, and you start focusing the message. But for the first draft, you just write, just everything needs to come out. And then you go back, and that the thinking about what the reader needs from this is going to guide all of your editing decisions.
Yeah.
There's a lot of my editing clients are surprised whenever they get it back, and they're saying, I thought you were going to take out all of the sentences that I ended with prepositions. Well, yeah, there is a grammar rule that says that that's a bad thing, but if that's how you talk, then that's how you need to express yourself in your book. The point of the editing process isn't to make you sound like a grammar book. It's to make sure your message is clear for your reader. So from the structure and content down to, do you need a comma here or not? It's all about, what does the reader need from you, not
Mm.
anything else.
Yeah, yeah. Mm. Yes. Yes, we don't want to turn our work into a grammar book. I love that. And actually, what you say is very powerful, Jennifer, because that would take the pressure off non native speakers. And English is not my first language, it's my second language. And I know that I don't write and speak how a native speaker of the language would do it. And there are times when I think in my language, but I speak in English. And so it's different from
Mhm.
how, let's say, you would do it. But then if I have to come across as me and not as a grammar book, it takes the pressure off me. And it tells
Yeah.
me that my message is more important than getting the grammar perfect.
Yeah. I mean, there are some grammar things that come up with certain language groups. I'm right now editing something by a native Spanish speaker, and for Spanish and French, all of the Latin languages, they tend to have a lot of modifying phrases before you get to the subject of the sentence. English speakers like to have the subject and the verb, and then you can have all the modification you want. And but I don't edit out all of it. You keep some of it in there for the sense of who has written it, but you get rid of, if every sentence is starting with a long chunk at the beginning before we get to the point of the sentence, you don't want to irritate the reader. So you do have to balance the two, but it still sounds like his voice.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's important to get that balance right.
Yeah.
We've got to sound as ourselves, and we have got to make sure that it's easy for the reader to understand and interpret what we are trying to say.
Yeah.
This has been such a fantastic conversation. So amazing. Tell us, Jennifer, do you have something exciting going on in your business? Any programs coming up? Anything that you are working on?
I do. Friday, I am relaunching my blogging membership, which is called Be a Happy Visible Blogger.
How to be
In
a
my
happy, visible blogger.
Mhm.
I like that.
And it has there are 3 ways you can join it. You can join an annual membership, which I think is £288 for the year. You can join monthly for £30 a month, or you can take the a la carte option. There are recorded mini courses. So the monthly monthly members will get 1 mini course a month and 1 group coaching call. The annual members get access to all of the mini courses from the beginning. For the a la carte, you can just choose the mini courses you want, and you can buy one-off coaching hours if you just need a little bit of help. But I wanted to have the 3 options that you can either see it as a regular recurring membership or the a la carte, because I think these memberships are starting to feel like gym memberships. You sign up for them because it's something you know you need to do, and then you don't. So if you want to try the a la carte, see what it's like, and then make a decision, that's fine. But yeah, the topics so far in the course are the Magic Ideas Generator, wherein if you spend about an hour implementing what I teach in that mini course, you'll have enough ideas to keep you blogging and posting on social media for at least a year. Then we've got using questions to make writing faster and easier. I just recorded this today. I can't think what the other one is. We've got one on titles and how to use them to get your readers' attention. So they're all sorts of topics, but I do kind of start at the beginning of coming up with your topics, and so that you don't have to do all of the courses in order, but if you do them in order, you'll understand why they're in that order.
Yeah, yeah. Brilliant.
So,
When we finish our conversation, will you be able to put in all the relevant links just underneath this video?
yep, I can do that. This week in my membership, I've got a free challenge, not in my membership, in my Facebook group. I've got a free challenge going on getting to know your ideal reader. So if anyone, you can catch up on that until the 19th if anyone wants to join that.
Is it a 5-day thing?
It is a 5-day thing. So today's lesson was looking at your reader's backstory to find points earlier on, usually childhood or teen years, that you can connect to in your blog post to make it easier for your reader to connect to you.
Okay. I should check it out. I love
Been
everything
fun.
to do with stories.
Yesterday's was all about images because that was understanding the space your reader lives in. So finding pictures of her house and what her daily routine is, so that you can see what she's doing and where she is when she worries about the thing that you help with. I think that is more useful than just listing pain points. I think you need to know what it is that triggers that thought, so that you can.
Yes, yes, that is true. So tell us, Jennifer, how can people work with you? How can they get in touch with you?
I will put my website and email in the comments below this video, but you can work with me on blogging or book writing. This financial quarter, I am focusing all of my stuff on the blogging because I'm relaunching the membership. Next quarter, I will be looking at relaunching the group writing course that goes along with my book. There's a book in every expert. I'll put a link up that you can get the PDF copy of the book for free. Well, you can get a PDF copy of the book for your email address. You're free to unsubscribe from my list anytime, but I don't want price to be the thing that stops people from writing. And even if you're not writing a book, the advice on how to write in there applies to shorter forms too.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yes, it'll be useful to have all the links. And I think you are on Facebook, and are you also on LinkedIn?
I am on LinkedIn and Instagram. I don't really post on Twitter. I'm mostly just there to see what my husband's posting about. He's on Twitter all the time. And he'll laugh about something. Oh, it's something on Twitter. Just tell me what it is.
Yeah, just drop all the links.
I will do.
Okay. So before we finish our conversation, if you had one big message that you want to share with our audience, what would it be?
Be kind to yourself. Whatever it is that you're trying to do, don't take not doing it today as a sign that you can't do it, just that you didn't do it today.
Wow.
'Cause
Wow. What a beautiful message. Jennifer, thank you so much for coming and talking to our audience. And yeah, thank you so much. I
thank you.
learned
It's
so
been
much from
lovely.
you.
It's been fun. Thank you.
Thank you.